An investigation into the sinking of a Russian cargo ship in late 2024 has suggested it was likely carrying two nuclear submarine reactors, possibly destined for North Korea. The circumstances surrounding why Russia's Ursa Major vessel ground to a halt before suffering a series of catastrophic explosions off the coast of Spain remains a mystery. But a CNN investigation says it may be the result of a high-stakes intervention by a Western military, sparking both intrigue and scepticism. Alexey Muraviev is a senior academic in national security and international relations. He joins me now live from Perth. Mr. Muraviev, thanks very much for joining us this evening. There's a lot of moving parts to this story, but what was your initial reaction to these suggestions that the Ursa Major was carrying nuclear submarine reactors to North Korea?
Well, it seems a bit dubious to me and surprising as well, given the fact that if we take this hypothesis as one of the possibilities, then one of the questions that I would probably raise is why this sensitive cargo was dispatched to North Korea, why such a complicated route which would take it through some high-risk areas such as the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, a very lengthy journey. And given the fact that Russian merchants have been already attacked by that time in the Mediterranean, the area in itself. So a standoff between Russian and Western navies since before the start of the war in Ukraine. I would probably imagine if this was in fact a possible mission of that particular ship, that the Russians would have probably chosen a much safer and much more discreet route, which, for example, would be via the so-called Northern Sea route, the maritime route that connects Europe with Asia along Russia's Arctic coast, where the Russians will have full control of the situation. It would be out of reach to Western navies, or at least the bulk of it, and it would also be shorter and safer. And even if the Russians would have chosen that particular route to carry cargo that was suggested, which is nuclear submarine reactors, I would probably imagine that the ship would be escorted by the Russian warship. It wouldn't be just left on its own, carrying such sensitive cargo, given the overall sensitivity surrounding the renewal of Russia-North Korea defense ties.
Let's delve a bit into the dynamics between North Korea and Russia. Security cooperation between these two countries has risen dramatically since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Has nuclear material ever been part of the equation?
Well, it's certainly been part of the speculation that may actually be one of the outcomes of North Korea providing direct military support to the Russians, that the Russians would in turn provide North Korea with, for example, blueprints for nuclear submarine design, even though it makes no operational strategic sense for North Korea to possess nuclear submarines. And certainly the speculation that there may have been grounds for collaboration in the nuclear missile field have also been suggested. Bearing this in mind, we also need to remember that North Korea, despite being under a very tight sanctions regime, has been successful in developing its own indigenous nuclear weapons capability. And at the time when North Korea obtained nuclear weapons capability, successfully carried out a number of nuclear tests and developed its mini nuclear arsenal, Russia was in fact part of the international sanctions regime against North Korea. So things obviously have changed dramatically over the past few years, as you have suggested, but there haven't been actual evidence to suggest that Russia was in fact transferring nuclear technology or nuclear weapons technology to North Korea, which was obviously the case during the Soviet times in terms of sharing nuclear scientific technology concerning nuclear development.
On that point, though, Russia has historically supported North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Pyongyang has even openly urged Moscow to share its nuclear technical expertise. Would North Korea's massive support for Russia during the Ukraine war have been enough to persuade Russia to step in that direction?
Well, I think the Russians were not going to simply go with to North Korea with an open list. I think they would be quite select of what sort of capability they would be willing to provide North Korea. I would imagine that in the first instance, if we're talking about defense cooperation, North Korea would probably be interested in strengthening its air defense capability, air power capability with Russia's support, and perhaps something with regards to early warning systems, perhaps some of the missile technology, even though North Korea displays a very impressive list or arsenal of all sort of missiles. But I think this is where the initial exchange of technology is likely to take place, in addition to North Korea gaining access to effectively Russian training manuals and training alongside the Russian troops, and by that gaining valuable combat experience, something that, for example, South Korean army lacks.
Now, there are a few other elements to this story as well that I wanted to go through with you. So the ship had deviated from its course and issued a call for help. It suffered 3 explosions that killed 2 crew members and forced the rest to evacuate. A Russian military ship had been escorting the Ursa Major, a point that you raised earlier, so it was under some kind of escort, and it ordered nearby vessels to keep 2 nautical miles away once this happened, and it later asked the rescued crew to be returned immediately. Does all that sound like standard practice?
Well, it sounds like the ship was carrying something important, but again, I would still be a bit cautious of drawing conclusions that this is something that would be linked to secret dispatches of Russia-sensitive technology to North Korea. According to some Russian sources, at the time when this incident occurred, it was speculated that the ship was carrying parts for the Russian super nuclear icebreaker, which is currently being under construction in Russia's Far East. In particular, she was supposed to carry cranes, propellers, and some other equipment. And because that icebreaker is also nuclear propelled, so I cannot rule out the possibility that perhaps the ship was also carrying a nuclear engine for that particular unit, which is currently under construction in Russia's Far East. And because of that, the ship perhaps received armed escort at some point during its journey to the Pacific.
Now, this CNN report also says that there was a pillow-shaped hole in the ship's hull, and it suggests that it was made by a certain torpedo that's only used by the United States, a few NATO allies, and then there's also Russia and Iran that use that particular torpedo as well. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I mean, if the ship indeed came under the torpedo attack, even though the act remains undisclosed by who instigated such an attack, it would probably be considered as casus belli because the ship belonged to Russian state logistical defense company. It was part of the Syrian Express during the time when Russia sustained its operation in Syria. It operated under the mandate of Russia's Ministry of Defense, even though it was a civilian vessel. So attacking Russian flagged vessel, which is formally registered with the Russian state by foreign navy, regardless of the cargo that she carried, could potentially be viewed as a trigger point for an open escalation of tensions between the instigator of such an attack and Russia. It was quite interesting that the report about the North Korean link surfaced just a few days after North Korean troops marched on the Red Square as part of Russia's annual V-Day celebrations, and which also followed by intensive discussions between Russian and North Korean officials about future defense collaboration. So perhaps it also needs to be viewed in the context of the West getting increasingly uneasy about strengthening ties between Russia and North Korea, which for the first time since the Cold War formed a very clear defense pact in the Pacific as a countermeasure to security and defense arrangements that's been functioning in the region for quite some time, which also includes Australia.
Mr. Muraviev, just one final question for you from this CNN report as well. It also cites a Spanish investigation that found a week after this ship sank, a suspected Russian spy ship visited the wreckage where 4 further explosions were set off. It suggests that it was targeting the remains on the seabed. How do all those details strike you?
Well, to me, that's a pretty normal practice, given the fact that the Russians would probably been unable to undertake salvage operations. So as a result, they would try to destroy any sensitive information or material or cargo that may have been on board the ship. Something similar happened when Russia lost a couple of its fighters during carrier-borne operations off the coast of Syria. They also bombed the area where the fighters went down for the simple purpose that the wreckage would not be and would not end up in possession of Western intelligence or Russia's geopolitical rivals. So I can clearly see it's a reflection of the sensitive nature of the cargo, and the Russians try to effectively ensure that any sort of secrets will not be linked to the third party.